You fire me for stealing? I steal your business. My nephew, Bob, had a job selling cell phones at store in a mall. The store was owned by a licensed distributor of one of the big name brands. He was very good at convincing customers to buy calling plans, extended warranties, and accessories that were obscenely profitable. Pretty soon he was the #1 salesman in the store. The owners asked him to transfer to their other store in a different mall, replacing the assistant manager who they had just fired. In addition to an increase in his base pay, he'd get a cut of every sale made while he was in charge. It took him about 2 days to figure out why sales were down. Clueless sales reps and lousy management. The manager would disappear 4 hours at a time, leaving the sales reps to sit around ignoring customers. Most of them would show up late, leave early, or not bother coming in at all. And when they did speak to a customer, they had no idea how to make a sale. On his first day he outsold them all, after making sure the guys on his shift were actually doing their jobs, especially when it came to selling the high profit add-ons. The store's sales improved. The store manager saw what was happening and wasn't too happy. He knew it was matter of time before he was kicked out and Bob took his job. One day they received a shipment of new phones. As usual, Bob signed for them and locked them in a storage closet. The next day was his day off. The manager called and insisted he come in immediately because there was problem. Overnight someone had broken into the store and stolen about 100 of these brand new phones. The mall security camera showed 2 people driving up to the back door, opening it with a key, shutting of the alarm and walking out with the phones. The police were called. He was grilled by the police for a couple of hours, but they had no evidence against him and he had an alibi. But the manager convinced the owners that Bob was probably involved since he had signed for the phones, had keys to the door and storage closet, and knew the alarm code. Bob argued that they hadn't changed the locks or code after they fired the previous assistant manager and anyone could know about the shipment. But he was fired. Actually, they allowed him to resign, and they stiffed him on his last commission check. At the other end of the mall was a store that sold phones for one of the competing cell companies. They knew that since he had joined that other store, their sales were suffering. They hired him on the spot. Sales improved overnight. One of his favorite tricks was to stand in front of the store and wait for a customer to walk by carrying a shopping bag from that other store. He'd chat them up about their brand new phone, calling plan, warranty, etc. It's amazing how much the average mall shopper is willing to share with a stranger. Then he'd tell them that they probably didn't need the extended warranty and those accessories could be purchased at Walmart for about half the price. And he could sell them the exact phone with better plan for less money. If they agreed, he would walk them back to that other store and tell the clueless sales rep how to avoid that sale he just made. Then bring the customer back to his store to pick up their new phone. It took about 3 months before that other store closed its doors. Millions lost over a single flight. I was doing some HR training at work today and the HR rep told a story which was given as an example of one of the consequences of poor customer service. When my co-worker was going to be married, the wedding was out of state so as to be closer to his and the bride's families. One of his friends who was going to be in attendance had to fly coast to coast across the US in order to attend. The day of the wedding, his flight was cancelled, and the airline refused to rebook him a flight in time. And on top of that were not at all kind or hospitable. As a result, he missed his good friend's wedding, and this pissed him off. What the airline didn't know was that this particular person worked as a travel agent. His job was to book commercial flights for large groups. This airline was one of the bigger international airlines based in the US, and someone he would normally consider when booking flights. However, after this airline refused to rebook his cancelled flight and caused him to miss his best friend's wedding, he refused to even consider them as an option for his clients. He was so pissed off by the airline's customer service that he even kept track of how many times he could have booked a flight with them, but instead chose another, perhaps even more expensive option. Over the next couple of years, he cost the airline over $2 million in lost revenue because they were rude to him and refused to rebook his flight, causing him to miss his friend's wedding. Obligatory sorry for formatting. I'm on mobile. Mean lady hates everyone, especially us. We buy her house after she failed to pay her debt. First of all, English isn't my first language, but I try my best. I'm on mobile, so formatting may be it. TLDR at the bottom. The house we live in was built at the same time as hers. My parents were often at the construction site and help if they can. The strange lady was nice to us at the beginning, but that changed soon. This happened around Christmas 2017. We have a neighbor who is very unpopular in our neighborhood. She is well known for harassing people who use the public path at the left side of her house. The path is 1 out of 3 to reach the public playground behind her house. If someone uses the path, she would scream at them that this is her path on her private property, which is wrong. Sometimes she would close the path with a red and white plastic chain and won't let anyone use the path. She would scream at kids on the playground when they were loud. At daytime, she always has her shutters almost down so she can stalk the people on the street and stay unseen. If some kid's ball landed in her garden, she would bring it to the kids and destroy it with a knife right in front of them. All kids knew this and would run by her house if they wanted to go on the playground. When the neighbors' kids were playing in the winter outside in the snow, she would call the CPS equivalent in my country and tell them they were locked outside by their parents as a punishment. If someone walked by her house at night, she would often call the police due to a noise complaint. She was known by everyone in our neighborhood as the witch, but she hated my family in particular. We lived right beside her house. Our houses shared one wall. When me and my sister were young, we would use the swing in our garden or jump on our trampoline. She would regularly file noise complaints and often harass me and my sister when we were alone in our garden. If my parents heard her screaming swear words at us from the first floor of her house, they would yell back. If me or my sister walked on the path by her house, she would scream at us. We used the path daily on our way to school. One time when I came home from school, she was in her car with the trunk on the sidewalk. When I walked by the back of her car, she howled the engine and the dark exhaust hit me. Almost every night she would hit the shed wall with something to wake us up. Sometimes she ring on our door and try to make us go to other neighbors to complain about small things. We often had lawsuits with her. One time because her trees grew 2 over the border. Another time because she built a fence by sticking bamboo mats in the dirt and tearing it down the next day and telling the police we destroyed her wooden fence. We won all lawsuits against her because my uncle, he's teaching law school, gave us good advice on how to deal with her and named lawyers he knew were good. She never paid the workers who repaired things at her house and the electrical and water bills. When her old car broke down, she didn't pay the car mechanic and never got her car back. She was in debt and had a mortgage on her house. When the foreclosure came, we were at the court and bought her house. She was with us in the courtroom when the auction was and tried to buy her own house but wasn't allowed because she couldn't provide proof that she has enough money. We bought her house where she lived for 20+ years in front of her. We bought it because my parents were at the construction of her house and knew the workers did a great job at building it. We renovated it when she left. We repainted all rooms, renewed the insulation and put everywhere where no tiles were new wooden floor. My grandparents will be moving in her old house this fall. TLDR. Neighbor harassed the whole neighborhood and was extra mean to kids. She didn't pay bills and had a mortgage on her house. We bought it in front of her for my grandparents. Business refused to refund $40. The courts order him to pay $230. Story time. Last September, my wife had planned a wonderful Father's Day present for me. Father's Day is in September in Australia. This was to be my first ever Father's Day as a new dad, so to mark the occasion, my wife had arranged to have our daughter's face laser etched onto a dog tag. However, the day before Father's Day, she received the item back and it was, shall we say, subpar. So she came to me and showed me my present early. Now I've had some experience with IT retailers before and remembered to always come prepared when disputing the quality of any goods and services. So I set my phone to record all audio and approached the retailer. I explained that my wife was upset at the quality of the engraving and rightfully so. I requested a refund and was immediately met with resistance. To begin with, they blamed the quality of the photo we provided. Then when I disputed that, they said that laser engraving doesn't do depth very well and some faces can end up with some shadows missing. End of conversation. They refused to refund and threatened to call security if I didn't leave. The engraver is located in a mall that I also happen to work in. My wife and I left. We straight away left a less than glowing review on their Google page. This was met with accusations of us being unreasonable and threatening violence. Ours was not the only review to which they had this response. They informed us that the matter had been passed on to the local police and that a restraining order had been applied for. We immediately called all local police stations and were delighted to hear that they had never heard of the company in question. After some thought, and me being the stubborn bastard that I am, I decided to forward the matter onto the local small claims tribunal. A month or so passed and our day in the tribunal had arrived. We honestly weren't expecting the engraver to show up, but lo and behold, there he was, at a civil claims court, in camo pants and a hoodie. We met in a room with a mediator, who told us that it may not be worth chasing a $40 refund from someone who is insured ahead. She warned that it may end up costing more than the service to begin with. But, as mentioned before, I am a stubborn bastard. We pushed forward, opting to go to hearing. This is when we heard some marvelous news from the engraver. Oh, I'm not prepared to go to hearing today. I haven't got any of my evidence. Ding ding ding. We went to a hearing that day. The registrar ruled in our favor and issued a notice of payment. The business was to pay $40 within 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, no payment. No surprise. During this time, I had been communicating via email with the holder of the engraver's lease, who, in response to my complaint among many others, had decided to terminate the lease, effectively kicking the engraver out of the mall. My man. While the engraver was organizing a new venue for his business, I had filed a motion for a writ for levy of property, meaning the local sheriff was able to enter his premises and relieve him of merchandise to the value of the refund plus court fees, now totaling $139. I informed the engraver, asking him if he would like to settle like a reasonable person or have the sheriff pay him a visit. He was not a reasonable person. Once the writ had been issued, the fee then increased to $225. All I had to do was wait. And wait I did, until the 13th of March this year, when the sheriff finally attended his new business premises. He was offered an ultimatum: pay the fee, or have merchandise repossessed. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. The man paid. He was stubborn for 6+ months over a $40 refund, only to be down $225 plus $5 interest. But that's not how he law W or K's. Edit. TL. DR. Got refused $40 refund over poor laser engraving. Ended up receiving $230 after court process. Well, you were warned not to park there. This story happened about 15 years ago, give or take. At the time, I worked for a small industrial railroad in my city that served about 20 different industries along the docks. To get to the docks, from the yard where I would pick up the inbound deliveries to the industries cars, we had a mile of street trackage that ran right down the middle of a small street. Numerous bars lined the street on one side, with the river on the other side. Because of city regulations, we were only allowed to operate along that span of track between specific hours, typically 11 at night, to about 5 in the morning. However, since the bars were open at that time, it also meant that we had to trundle along at a crawl, usually walking pace, or just about that, and keep the locomotive on the front end of the movement. Every night I went down that street, there would typically be 2 or 3 people who had parked too close to the tracks, prompting me to have to get people to move their cars. It wasn't a major problem, just an annoyance, except for one guy. It seemed that every single night, I would have to stop about halfway down because this guy would always park his truck at an angle in the street, as opposed to parallel parking. There were some angle parking spaces, but they were further down where there wasn't rails in the road. Every single night, I'd have to head into the bar this guy owned and bug the guy to get him to move the truck. Most of the time, it'd take him a good 30 minutes to an hour to drag himself out and move the thing. This meant, of course, I was losing time that I needed to get my job done. After months of this, I finally decided that I had enough. So, I decided to have the guy towed. Yeah, that didn't work out as well as I hoped. Turned out that the guy also had some job with the city, or the mayor's office, or some friend in either. So, no one would dare come out and tow his truck. I think I waited there a good hour before he eventually came out and moved it, even having the gall to flip me the bird as he left. At that point, I decided that not only was I totally done with the guy, but if the chance arose, I was going to teach him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Nothing physical per se, just a hard-learned lesson. Couple days later, I found myself heading down the track with half a dozen heavy cars with machinery bound for the docks. As I rounded the curve and neared the place where that guy always parked, I gently applied the independent brakes on the locomotive. This would slow the heavy train, but wasn't enough to stop it outright. At least, not quickly. I waited until the very last minute, laying on the horn and applying the full brakes, bringing everything to a screeching halt in the middle of the street. As I felt the brakes begin to hold, there was this loud thunk and screeching and tearing of metal as the train simply punted the truck out of the way, tearing the bed clean off it in the process. This did not go unnoticed, as a crowd had started to gather out front of the bar when they heard the train coming. I stayed in the cab, calling back to dispatch and informed them that I'd struck a parked car, and they needed to get the police and a tow truck out to my location. All the while, I could hear this guy screaming, heard him over the sound of the locomotive no less, at the top of his lungs about how he was going to have me thrown in jail, sue the company, and all manner of things. Locking the doors, I opted to just wait in the cab for the boys in blue to arrive. Eventually, they pop around and start taking statements. I explained the problem, noting that I couldn't, well, I could have, but it wouldn't have been a good idea, simply slam on the brakes due to the cargo I was carrying, and that the only reason I hit the truck was because it was improperly parked. I added that the gentleman had been warned in the past that something like this could happen, and had ignored the warnings. The man, for his part, was simply livid, hopping around, yelling at me, yelling at the cops, and just beside himself. In the end, he was ticketed for his bad parking, obstructing the passage of a train, and his truck was totaled, and he ended up on the hook for paying for it. Truck was brand new, and not yet paid off, or so I was told. It took about 2 hours to clean up the mess, and I was, per company rules, suspended for a week during the company investigation. But honestly, it was worth it. Didn't have any problems with him from that point forward either. Disowning their daughter, regretting forever. This basically happened like 3 weeks ago. I moved out from my mother's house, since I was going off to university to study math and physics. My brother had a girlfriend, who I really liked and respected. I soon accepted her as part of my family. She used to spend lots of time at our place, because her parents were a nightmare. They were pretty poor, which doesn't have anything to do with them being horrible parents, just for context, but they also were stingy AF. Here in Germany, you'll get money for your child to buy them food, provide shelter, warmth and clothes. Her parents didn't spend her child money on anything for her. She had to sleep in a dark, cold room, buy her own clothes and got no pocket money. The only money she got was from her job, being a postgirl. That job only amounted to 48 euros total in a month, and her bus ticket would already cost her 58 euros. So she had to ask her mother to lend her something, which she would have to pay back to her. Her parents didn't want her to move out or go study, since she was way too intelligent for them to ever control. Unlike her simple brother, when she said she wanted to move together with my brother into the city, where she had gotten an apprenticeship, her mom nearly exploded. She actually had hoped she wouldn't get the job, so she could realize how stupid she was for wanting a good future for herself. You can imagine how much her parents hated my brother. Fast forward, I come back home to stay a few weeks at home, visiting friends and relatives. She is as usual at our house, but my mother then told me she was living here permanently, being registered exactly at my home address. I'm a little stunned, as I had only some days before that suggested the very thing to her, and she said she didn't want to break ties with her family. But things changed when her mom tried to cut up her prom dress she had been given by my mother as a present. She was furious about what her mother wanted to do. She just explained that she never got such a nice dress, so why would her daughter? My brother GF just called my brother. My mother then drove him. Since his car is getting fixed to her, they just packed up the most stuff they could carry, not including a lot of stuff my brother's GF had gotten as a present, since she didn't pay for it, so it wasn't hers. So her bike, her clothes given to her by her aunt, and some of the presents she had gotten from my brother had to be left behind, since she was threatening with the cops. The last words were, "You can always come back to us when he has beaten you black and blue. We love you." My brother can be a ducking asshole, but he never got violent towards anyone. Since this day she is living with us. Now here come the juice. We have gotten her parents to pay her the child money they are now owning her. We also requested for a money support for her, since she got no income. She is only 18. So she will get a lot of money, plus her child money, plus the apprenticeship earnings, plus a little extra from our family, since she isn't living with her family anymore. They were getting one jolt, with as a financial support given to you per person and square meters of your living space. The Wohnungsgeld also got a lot less, mind you. Her parents were gifting themselves smartwatches and laptops to Christmas. My brother's GF had gotten a shampoo bottle with a discount label on it. So, after a few days they realized they were in a lot of financial doo-doo and had to pay her back 4 months of child support, which they couldn't. They pleaded for the amount to be halved, which my brother's GF could have agreed to. But she just took a pen and said duck that, crossed out their plea and put it back into the envelope. She now doesn't have anything to do with her family anymore, who tried through multiple means to get to her. I really admire her for staying that cool all these years. She rocks. Thanks for formatting less bread.